guys, and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk. I'm your host, Alina, holistic nutritionist, and also your lead editor at the Hearty Soul. And you may notice here today that I do not have my regular host with me. This is not Nadia, who has morphed into a handsome man. Nadia is actually escapading right now in Europe. She's traveling through Iceland. But who we have with us here today is actually Dr. Jason Loken. And we are so grateful to have him on here. He is a naturopath, osteopath, RMT. He's currently doing his PhD in integrative medicine. He has done international lecturing. He's been on radio shows, TV shows. So we are so grateful for all his knowledge. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure.
Sounds like I got lots of time on my hands. So.
But welcome to the show. You know what? And he's actually been doing this for around 15 to 20 years now. So you're going to get lots of great insights and experience from him. So yeah, we are going to talk today about hypothyroid. But actually, before we do get into that, I do want to just say that I'm going to be doing double duty today. You'll notice I'm moving the slides and also manning the comments section, which Nadia usually does. So type away, ask all your questions that you have. We are here for you to answer everything, and just keep in mind to stick to the topic of hypothyroid if possible. And do remember that we can't give very specific medical advice on your case history. So yeah, with that being said, we're going to take it away with hypothyroid.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So before we even start talking about hypothyroid, the reason we sort of want to bring it up is because you guys, our audience, are so engaged with this topic for a very good reason. There's around 200 million cases right now of thyroid disease worldwide, and the majority of those are to do with hypothyroid. So there are two types of thyroid disease, two main types, I'll say. There's hyper and hypo, and hypo is your more low functioning thyroid function. So we will focus more on that today. But before we get into that and discuss sort of some of the causes and the symptoms, I want to take you through an analogy of how the thyroid works. And this was very helpful for me when I was a student as well. So let's forget the thyroid for a second. Let's just think about your internet connection at home. So right now you're on your laptop or you're on your mobile phone using your internet, right? But it is coming from an internet service provider. So that internet service provider is sending a signal to your router, and then it's that router's job to make sure that your devices, so your appliances like your phone or your laptop or maybe your TV that has internet, they all have receptors for Wi-Fi, and the second that this router is turned on, all of them are functioning optimally. Now, does an internet connection always work properly, Jason?
Never.
Right? How many times do you have like the spinning wheel of death, as they say, or it's very slow and it's not working, and then you try a bunch of things. It's not just one thing that's causing an error, right? It could be perhaps your internet service provider is down. So this is like your AT&T or your Verizon. Maybe that's not really working. Or maybe it's your router and you have to plug it and unplug it, see what works. It could be that your phone's not working. It could be that you haven't paid your electricity bills, your internet bills. So there's a host and number of reasons why your internet may not function. Now, similarly, let's talk about the thyroid, which is a perfect analogy. And Jason, please step in and elaborate on this. But you know, your internet service provider is kind of like your brain, which has your pituitary gland, which is sending a signal, like TSH, as a signal to the thyroid gland. So that's the thyroid stimulating hormone, saying, okay, thyroid gland, start making some T4. And then that T4 needs to get converted to the active form called T3, usually in your liver or your gut. And that's when all the cells that have the receptor for the thyroid hormone, similar to our appliances, remember they have a receptor for Wi-Fi. So your cells in the body have a receptor for the thyroid hormone, and if it's all working well, your cells are good. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Jason?
No, that's perfect. I think of it very much the same way you did on that last slide. I think of it a little bit more like a corporation where you've got the president or the CEO of the corporation is like the hypothalamus that sort of oversees the whole big picture, and then sends its instructions down to the pituitary, which is like the project manager. Then they're the ones that kind of then decide who they're going to divvy out the task to. So thyroid being one of them, adrenal could be another. And so then they send the information out to there, and then the thyroid's the one that actually goes and does the job and sends its hormones out to go and do everything.
Perfect. I like that analogy
same
a
idea.
lot as well. Okay. So the core concept here really, guys, is that look at this poor, sad thyroid gland. The key concept is that every cell in the body is affected. Your thyroid governs your metabolic rate and touches every single cell. So if you have poor thyroid function, it's going to affect everything, and you're going to feel a lot of symptoms.
Yeah, there's receptor sites on every cell in the body for thyroid hormones. So when it's down, everything's down.
Okay. So, this is a perfect segue, because now, Jason, I want to ask you, what are some of the most common symptoms that you see when people come to you with low thyroid? Yeah,
I think probably the most common ones that most people, if I see people for weight management, I think most people come in and they've tried a lot of stuff and they're pretty convinced that they must have low thyroid function, because why else might it be difficult to lose weight? It's not always the case, but that being said, inability to lose weight or putting on extra weight for no change in diet, that's something to look at that could be related to low thyroid function. You generally get things like skin's not as lustrous as it used to be. You start to see dry skin or skin conditions like eczema. You start to see that there's changes in their tolerance for cold. So we hit winter time and all of a sudden you're kind of finding you're having more and more difficult staying warm. So cold intolerance is another way.
How do you know if it's like I'm just regular feeling cold, or like this isn't normal, I'm feeling
because you'll also
cold.
see it not just in winter time. So you'll probably start to see it even when it's warm. So like some people, you could be, Toronto in the middle of the summer and still need a blanket on you to keep warm at night. That's a pretty good indication that something might be wrong with your thermal regulation. But I think a lot of the times the symptoms that people don't think about are the ones that affect their brain, for example. So things like anxiety and depression, which are rampant nowadays. Those are big symptoms that often have a thyroid underlying tone to it. Brain fog.
So not being able to concentrate or recollect things.
Forgetful all the time. And a general feeling of blah. Like most people I see that really have low thyroid function just feel something's off and they don't know what.
Okay, that's awesome. Is there any one that's like the most common, you would say? That like
I think probably low energy. So when you start to see patients that are chronically low energy and you've tested a lot of other underlying factors that could be there, thyroid's often one at the top of my head. But it's usually the combination. So you'll see like low energy, constipation, brain fog. It's a myriad of things that usually present at the same time.
Does it take people a long time to figure out that it's their thyroid? Do you feel like they're suffering with it for years sometimes?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is that it's not routinely tested properly, which I'm sure we'll get into as we get along too. So
for sure. Okay, so just moving along then. Why is it happening to me? So here is where we're really going to dig deep into the root causes of hypothyroid. And notice that I said causes and not cause, because this is definitely one of those situations where it's not so black and white. It's not like, oh, this happens, it's in my genes, or I have low TSH levels, therefore I have hypothyroid. This is probably one of the most complex chronic conditions out there, and you really have to look at every person as an individual case-by-case basis. But we're going to go over some of the top causes for sure right now. So to start with, this is maybe something that you guys are familiar with. Maybe if you've gone to the doctor before to check out your thyroid, maybe he's done some blood work, and again, we're going to talk about this later on, but maybe they've just looked at your TSH levels. So your thyroid stimulating hormone that's coming from the pituitary gland and telling your thyroid gland to make thyroid hormone, and that which is your T4. Your T4 is often known as your thyroid hormone, and these are the two that are most often checked in lab work. Or would you say they're perhaps lucky if that's checked?
Yeah, you're lucky if that even gets checked. I honestly think over the years, the standard screen that you'll get from and from most medical doctors is just getting more and more limited. And that's not always that the fault of your medical doctor. A lot of times their hands get tied a little bit, because if you don't present with very specific symptoms, then they aren't allowed or they can get in trouble for testing too many different things. And technically, they have to just check a TSH. And if that's off, then they're warranted to check other things. But what you'll learn pretty soon is that runs into a lot of other troubles.
Okay. We do actually have a question right now from Hima about thyroid medication. So hi, Hima. She is wondering, should we take thyroid medication as early in the morning, or new studies are suggesting to take it as you go to bed?
Yep,
Go ahead.
I think for the most part, I've read those studies too, and I still find with every thyroid patient, it's a little bit different. So I've seen some switch it from doing it early in the morning or doing it late at night or switching back and forth. Ultimately, it's whatever is going to help them feel best. So the problem with thyroid medication is that what you'll kind of find out as we go along here is that thyroid medication by itself is not usually the answer to things. It's a piece of it potentially, but there's a lot of factors that might be interfering with you getting the maximum amount out of that medication. So timing may be one of those things that might work better for your body. I would experiment and I would see which one works better for you.
Awesome. And just for the audience's knowledge as well, when someone is taking thyroid medication given by a doctor, like Synthroid, is that usually just TSH or T4, or is there ever anything else in that medication?
Vast majority of time when you get a medication from your doctor, most of the time it's going to be a T4. And there's a long history as to why that's kind of developed that way. And you'll hear other types of hormones too, like maybe T3 or maybe desiccated thyroid, which is a combination of T3 and T4. But for the most part, you are likely, if you're on thyroid medication, almost probably 99.9% of the time, it'll be a T4 medication like Synthroid or levothyroxine or something like that.
Okay, awesome. So like we said earlier, guys, TSH and T4 is usually what doctors will focus on. But if you just look at the slide over here, you'll see that there's so many other pieces of the puzzle, right? This is going back to that Wi-Fi analogy where the process can break down at so many points along the way, and there's so many hormones and things involved. So just some of them here, you know, outside of TSH and T4, we have T3, which is the active form. It's what T4 needs to get converted into for it to actually activate in your cell and work. We have RT3, which is reverse T3, which I will ask Jason more about and he can touch upon. There's thyroid binding globulin as well, which I think many people have probably not even heard of, which is so important to be aware of. And even cellular sensitivity. So how sensitive are your cells actually to even receiving? So even if your hormones are working well, maybe your cells are just not actually open to receiving.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe you want to talk a bit more about
It's like some people to help.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's lots of different hormones. Ultimately, you want to get a big array of all of them to really pull together the full picture. So TSH tells you the hormone from the brain. That's the first one we need to look at. I think part of the, do you want me to get into some of the troubles with some of these ones?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Part of the problem with TSH is that our range in North America, for the most part, is usually between somewhere around, give or take the lab, 0.5 to 5, which is a fairly large range. And other places in the world have actually cut that back significantly. And a lot of times, what they found now is that if you are starting to get above 2, then you are starting to get certain hypothyroid types of susceptibilities. So when that's going on, a lot of times your doctor might not even suggest anything. They might see that you fall into your normal reference range and then they just leave it. So TSH you have to look at with a functional range. In functional medicine we talk about ranges where people do best in. So there's a normal range and then there's an optimal zone that you want to try and get into. So we're going to look more at where do we want to see you. Free T3 and free T4 need to be in certain zones as well. T3 is a big one that hardly ever gets tested anymore, but ultimately you have to get free T4 to be converted to T3, free T3, because that's the metabolically active hormone.
Could we actually just elaborate on what free means here? I put it in brackets to remind myself that there's bound and free.
So when we look at thyroid binding globulin, that's a protein, along with, there's 2 others that do that too, but that's one of the main ones that binds thyroid hormone. So you have to bind thyroid hormone first so you can transfer it around the body. And then it can freely let it go again. And so the free hormone is active hormone. When it's bound to this, it's not active. And so where this runs into trouble sometimes is there's certain conditions where you might increase your thyroid binding globulin. Like it tends to increase during pregnancy. Certain conditions that you probably be a good episode to do at some point would be something around estrogen dominance.
Oh, we did that 2 weeks ago, I believe.
Okay, so something like that could be one that could raise it as well. And then what happens is you end up binding too much of it, so you have less activated free hormone in your system. And cellular sensitivity, that would be more like, think of like diabetes with insulin sensitivity. The cells get sort of desensitized to the hormone itself, so they don't react to it, which then creates a chain reaction, because if the cells aren't reacting to it, then the pituitary gland thinks that it needs more, so then it keeps producing more and more. And then that creates an array of different troubles as well.
Are there any key things you would say that affect cellular sensitivity? I think, is exercise one of them, or is that not as?
I actually think of it a lot like I do with diabetes. So with insulin sensitivity or insensitivity to insulin receptors, exercise is going to be one of the things that's going to help. And a lot of these factors that make the most benefits are usually things that generally improve a lot of your overall health. Reverse T3, that's like a Trojan horse. So T4 will ultimately convert to T3, which is activated hormone. But if you've got certain problems going on, often something like adrenal gland issues or something along those lines, and your body's under a lot of stress, what can happen is that T4 gets converted to reverse T3, which binds into the cells, so it fits into this synapse, so that free T3 can't actually access it. So it sort of binds up spots that T3 should be able to get into, which then functionally makes you have low levels of T3 in your system.
It's taking up that room.
Yeah.
Okay, so we actually have a question right now as well. Pamela's saying hi. Hi. She says she's happily watching from Brisbane in Australia. Hey, Pamela.
That's awesome.
Thanks for watching. We have Lynn asking a question, and I think a part of this actually may have gotten answered as well. So hey Lynn, she's asking, I have been taking levothyroxine for 8 years now. I'm still not well. I have been up and down on it. I'm still ill. What can I do? The test said it's at the right level. So this sort of goes into exactly what you just said. So many people may be going in, getting testing done, but because that range is so broad and so wide, they may come back and the doctor says, you're normal, right?
So part of it I would wonder would be first, are you in that sort of 1 to 2 range for TSH? That's your optimal zone. That's where you want to try and get into. If you're above that, something might still be off. And the other problem is that the pituitary, the part in the brain, is very sensitive to thyroid hormone. So it will often adjust when you're on thyroid hormone before the tissues actually react. So you can still be low in the tissues, even though the brain thinks you're actually getting enough because you're taking thyroid hormone. And then this gets into things that you would need to look at doing to optimize your conversion in tissues, which really gets into
everything that we're going to talk about
the stuff we're going to talk to right now. So stay with us.
Perfect. Please stay with us. Like you said, that's just one part of the story. We really have to look at it from a holistic perspective and look at the root causes. So here are actually some of the root causes, again, just some of them that actually affect all those hormones that we just spoke about. So for example, poor liver and gut health. Remember when I was telling you that analogy and showing you how the thyroid works? So T4, when it converts to T3, that conversion, a lot of it actually takes place in other places in the body, like your liver and your gut. So if those are not in optimal function or working well, that's going to affect that conversion and the T3 getting into your cells. Other things like lack of exercise, which we had spoken about, affecting cellular sensitivity. Nutrients. There are so many nutrients that we want to consider. It's not just iodine. We're going to talk a little bit about iodine on the next slide, but there are definitely other nutrients that affect that conversion from T4 to T3 as well. So did you want to add something there?
I think when you think about root causes, the most important thing to look at with hypothyroidism specifically is that it's important to remember that 90% or more of hypothyroidism in North America is actually Hashimoto's, which means that it's an autoimmune condition. So the real question is, what's the root cause for autoimmunity? Why are so many people getting autoimmunity? And Hashimoto's is the most common autoimmune condition in the world. So now we have to look at all the different things that ultimately are going to help with Hashimoto's, will help with almost any autoimmunity.
And I believe you said that for hypothyroid, 90% of cases are actually Hashimoto's.
Yeah,
correct?
90% of the cases for hypothyroidism are Hashimoto's.
So for most people, you actually have to address your underlying autoimmune condition, which again, we're going to get into, but that's very important to know. So here we're just going to look at, in a little bit more detail, some of those root causes. The first one we are going to talk about, as promised, is nutrient status, and specifically iodine. Because I feel like a lot of people just think, oh, I have low thyroid, so I should just go get myself some iodine tincture. I should start eating all the seaweed in the world, iodized salt, iodine, iodine, iodine. And that's going to help my thyroid. But really, how many cases do you think are actually related to iodine deficiency?
This is, as we were talking about earlier, I think this is one of the more controversial topics around hypothyroidism. And you will see different, very renowned experts in this field around hypothyroidism. Half of them will say go high dose iodine, like you would see in like a Japanese culture, where they would have about 12.5 milligrams of iodine, and that everybody needs that. And then you'll see the other camp that'll say absolutely do not. You take too much iodine and you're going to actually create Hashimoto's. So I think ultimately it's why when it comes to iodine, you really have to work with a functional medicine practitioner of some sort to make sure that it would be a good nutrient for you. My general tendency would be, I think, probably a low level of iodine. Like we usually look at 1 to 200 micrograms, very low level to start with. And work on all of the other factors that play into that play into hypothyroidism, because even if you bump up your iodine, if all these other things are going on, it's only going to be a small piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Awesome explanation. So then next over here we have, other nutrients like tyrosine. So just to give you guys, just take a step back, the reason why you want iodine, because iodine and tyrosine together help make T4 hormone. So of course, if tyrosine, which is an amino acid, is low, found in protein, that could be a reason as well. Zinc and selenium is the two nutrients that are very important in that conversion from T4 to T3. So that's something to definitely look at. You may have seen on a Hearty article or in the World Wide Web that eating Brazil nuts every day is pretty good, usually like 2 to 4, and you get enough of your selenium. So that's definitely good practice. And then there's also things like iron and your stored iron, your ferritin levels to look at as well, and vitamin D. Don't know if you want to touch upon sort of some of those and what you see as important?
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. I think things like iron and ferritin, which is just your stored iron, and vitamin D, those are part of a standard series of blood tests that I would do for almost everybody, because when you look at the symptoms you get from low levels of those, they often mimic symptoms that you would get from hypothyroidism too. So outside of supporting thyroid function in many different ways and conversion in some ways, they also, if they're low, they're just one more log in the fire that's going to create problems. So the whole thing is you're trying to minimize load on the body. So when you can top everybody up into optimal levels for a lot of these big nutrients that play into hundreds of different reactions in the body, you also take the load off of the body.
Could you also mistake, let's say, an iron deficiency for hypothyroid sometimes? Because I think you can feel cold with an iron deficiency, feel tired and brain fog, so it could mask it.
Absolutely, that's what I mean. Like you scan all of those, because if they are low, they will often mimic symptoms of hypothyroidism. And so then you don't want to be treating hypothyroidism if you actually have a iron deficiency, which is actually very easy to correct most of the time.
Okay, awesome. So that's just nutrient status, guys, and those were just some of the nutrients we wanted to talk about. I definitely wanted to bring this up because I know this is a question that may be on a lot of your minds, because we get asked all the time on the Hearty Soul page, should you be avoiding goitrogenic foods, which are things that come from the brassica family, for example. So things like your kale and your broccoli and your cabbage. You may have heard, there's so many articles that were going out before saying, you know, don't eat kale. Kale is so bad for your thyroid. You're going to give yourself hypothyroid. So we wanted to touch a little bit upon that and see how much truth there is to that, and should we be avoiding goitrogenic foods?
Yeah. The only goitrogenic food I think for the most part you need to avoid is soy. Soy is probably the worst one. When it comes to these things, the amount you would have to eat for it to actually be an issue is substantial. So I don't think you'd actually be able to eat enough of those to really affect your thyroid. If you were still concerned about it at all, then make sure that they are likely steamed. So if you cook them a little bit, then there's less chance that they will aggravate your thyroid in any way. But outside of that, they're big players in things like optimizing detoxification pathways in liver, which you'll find out is one of the possibilities that can be playing into issues with thyroid as well, because most of your conversion of T4 to T3 happens in your liver. So if that's sluggish and not working well, you want to treat that with diet as much as you can.
So it's more helpful than harmful. If you're gonna eat them and you have low thyroid function or worried about it, just steam or saute or boil it. And at the end of the day, you're not having a liter of kale. You're probably having maybe half a cup's worth in your smoothie or in a salad once in a while, right? So it's not gonna be too much problem. I actually wanted to touch on the soy a little bit too. Should people be worried about fermented organic forms of soy? And is it only those who have hypothyroid, or is it like everybody?
Well, for the most part, I think soy is on my top list of foods that people have troubles with. So if you're looking at even like a top 6 or a top 8 of food sensitivities that people have issues with, soy's up there. Soy, along with corn, is one of the most genetically modified foods on the planet. So another reason that can actually be playing into thyroid function is GMO food. So I generally say eliminate it. If you can get good quality fermented soy,
miso, tempeh,
and you eat it like it was traditionally meant to be eaten, that's a different story, because you look at population studies in certain places in Asia where they do have enough soy, but they're not eating it like we do in North America. But North America, it's like let's have soy protein powder, let's have soy in bars. So it's like it's not meant to be done like that. And like anything, as soon as you overdo it, a good thing becomes a bad thing after a while.
Okay. So we do have some questions before we move on to the next slide. We have Denise. Hi, Denise. She's saying, it's been so difficult for me to lose weight. I've gained 20 pounds. I'm exercising and on a low carb diet. Do you recommend anything else to lose weight? So first of all, I guess we're going to assume that you have a hypothyroid condition and you've been trying to lose weight. And of course, you have to look at the whole picture again, and maybe you can look at one of our previous episodes as well that we did on weight loss, where so many things come into play. So maybe you have to look at your stress levels and your adrenal function to see if your cortisol levels are maybe high. Some of these other root causes here that we're talking about, things like your sleep or your exercise, whether there's a sluggish liver or sluggish gut health. So there's so many things to consider. I would say if you've been exercising and eating a real whole foods diet and you're still struggling, to look at those other things like your hormonal balance overall as well. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's see if we have another question. Okay, cool. We can move on. All right, so we talked a little bit about nutrient status as a root cause. Now we want to talk a bit about digestive issues and gut health, which I know Jason will love talking about as well. I think every holistic practitioner loves talking about gut health because it's where disease or chronic disease can really stem from and affect your body as a whole. So some of the things to consider are, for example, bacterial overgrowth, so dysbiosis. If you have too much of the bad bacteria versus the good bacteria in your body, one of the key roles of bacteria is actually to help trigger that conversion from T4 to T3. So again, if you have maybe too much processed food, or you've had antibiotics, birth control pill, any of those things that could mess up that balance in there, that could put you at risk as well. Constipation, again, goes hand in hand with bacterial overgrowth, low stomach acid, again, feeding that internal toxicity. And we do want to talk about leaky gut. We've talked about this in a previous episode very briefly, but I would like Jason to go into it a bit more, because leaky gut is so closely tied to autoimmunity. And that's very important for us to talk about, since 90% of hypothyroid cases are Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition. So Jason, if you could please tell us what a leaky gut is and why people should be worried.
Well, it's really important because when you, recent medical research has kind of shown that if you have autoimmunity, you have to have 3 key things. You have to have some sort of genetic predisposition, you have to have some kind of epigenetic trigger, and then you have to have intestinal permeability, which is leaky gut. And those 3 things are going to be the big ones that are going to trigger autoimmunity. So leaky gut is basically, if you picture the gut lining is about 1 cell thick, and it should be super tight. Nothing should get through there.
Super thin.
Super thin. But it's why it's also like it can repair fairly well because it's not a massive thing, but also be damaged so easily. The gut generally should be super tight. It should be impermeable to most things. So if you are eating a bunch of foods, those foods should all be broken down into the smallest little, so protein should be broken down to amino acids, fats to fatty acids, carbohydrates to sugars, for the most part, before they then diffuse across that gap, or diffuse across the gut lining into the bloodstream. And then the body knows what to do with those. It's not, it doesn't scare the body. It's used to seeing amino acids. It'll make its own proteins. The problem is that when you've had like some of the things that you had talked about, so birth control pill, chronic stress, antibiotic use, a standard North American diet, those things all wreak havoc on your gut lining. And so the gut is held together by these little things called tight junctions. And what happens is that once it starts to get damaged, those tight junctions start to separate and you start to get gapping. Okay? So then what happens, you go and eat your regular food, and all of a sudden, you're now getting partial proteins sneaking through these gaps, or whole proteins that are getting into the bloodstream. And now what the body does is it looks at it and goes, well, it's got like a Rolodex for like every protein in the body. And if there's something there that it does not make itself, it is going to look at it as being foreign, no different than if it was a virus or a bacteria. And so then it tags as being foreign and creates antibodies to it. And now every time you eat that food, you get an immune reaction. And now the problem is that certain proteins in foods or bacteria or viruses look very similar to tissue in the self. So
I believe the gluten is one of them, correct?
Gluten is probably one of the worst ones. And so then every time you eat these foods and you trigger this immune reaction and your body's being overdone all the time, it's like it gets kind of tired and a bit confused. And then it sort of goes, well, that tissue on the thyroid looks close enough to that food or that bacteria, so let's just get it too. And this is one of the causes called molecular mimicry that we think happens for autoimmunity. And so correcting leaky gut and healing this, getting the gut to break foods down properly, all of those things then start to decrease the load. And this is why you will be told to go on an elimination diet for a period of time, because you have to you have to pull all the logs out of the fire to get everything to calm down so that you can actually then work on repairing the gut, so that then eventually maybe you can start to reintroduce things a little bit without it being such a problem for the body.
And how long would that process, I mean, I know this is going to be so different person to person, but is there like a range of time that someone would probably need to take to repair a leaky gut?
Yeah, it depends on how much damage has been done. That's one thing. And depends on the age and how healthy the person is. So I would say on average, takes probably a good month. I would say 3 weeks to a month to just take the foods out to even see how much of a difference your body feels like when it's not being chronically triggered. But then it can take several months to actually repair. And that's with doing a number of different things to actually heal up the gut lining. But it depends on the degree of inflammation. So there's a number of factors, but I would say on average for leaky gut, I would be looking anywhere from 3 months to well over a year for some people.
Wow, okay. And are there any top foods that you would say, I know again everyone is different, but are there like 3 or 4 top offenders that people should be cautious
everybody
about?
Picks on gluten nowadays, but it's really for quite a good reason, because gluten creates a lot of troubles. What they just found out recently was that even if you were tested and you came back negative for celiacs and even negative for gluten sensitivity, we still know that gluten creates inflammation and intestinal permeability, because it produces a little byproduct called zonulin, which actually breaks down those tight junctions in the intestine. So even if you don't think you're getting symptoms, you likely are. And if you're getting symptoms in the gut barrier, guess what? You're also getting it up in the blood-brain barrier. And this is why you start to get this gut-brain axis where you get these symptoms in the gut that are then creating a lot of these problems like anxiety and depression and brain fog and forgetfulness and all these different issues.
Okay.
It's all creating inflammation ultimately.
Okay, so definitely the gluten, and then maybe like
dairy, gluten, corn, sugar, and artificial sugars, other than a couple that I think generally do fairly well, like stevia seems to be pretty safe, xylitol seems to be pretty safe.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll find eggs, although I hate it when eggs come up because I think there's so much benefit to eggs.
Yeah, I know. I always hate that one too. It's like I try to say it last.
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay, so then those guys are the two top issues, but bigger issues we sort of wanted to cover: nutrient status, your gut health. But then here's a host of other issues as well to maybe consider. So there's things like infection. If you've had chronic infection for a long time, it's kind of trauma to the body in a certain way, right?
Yeah. Well, and it just keeps aggravating the immune system, so it gets into that overexcited reaction over and over and over again.
Okay. Lack of exercise, we've already spoken about. Adrenal fatigue. So I don't know if you guys watched the adrenal fatigue episode a few weeks back. If you didn't, definitely check it out. If you feel tired and stressed out all the time, it's in our video library. But with adrenal fatigue, it's affected by other hormonal systems as well. And everything's in sort of a delicate hormonal balance in the body, where if you have adrenal fatigue, sometimes your thyroid is then overcompensating for low functioning adrenals, and it can be vice versa as well. So everything works in that delicate balance.
This was, for the adrenal fatigue was something fascinating. There's a thyroid pharmacist named Isabella Wentz who's done a lot of research in this. And she actually came up with a theory that's called, I believe it's a safety theory on thyroid. And so she thinks that it actually could be an adaptive model, that when our bodies, evolutionary, when we would go through periods of stress, it was, and maybe famine, that it was actually beneficial to down-regulate the thyroid so that we used less energy, our metabolism slowed down, we'd sleep more, all of these things would happen so that we could get through the sort of crisis or the stressor so that then we could come out the other side. And now in today's world of chronic stress, it's curious as to whether or not that is a constant trigger that is actually, we are in some ways creating it because of our lifestyle.
Very interesting. I did not know that. Okay. Two other issues to touch upon too, I guess. One is heavy metal toxicity that can perhaps build up in the body. MTHFR, which I don't know if you guys have heard about before, but it is becoming a little bit more mainstream now. People are hearing about it. This is a bit of a genetic issue. I believe it affects your methylation pathways, which helps your body detoxify. And if it can't sort of eliminate all of those like toxins or break them down properly in their chemicals or flush out excess hormones, again, that can all sort of breed that toxicity and affect your thyroid. Anything more you wanted to add?
There's lots of stuff coming up with genetic testing on all of these things, and ultimately there's thousands of different ones that you can check, so it's hard to know the net balance between all of them. But if your methylation status is lower, which is one of the primary detoxification pathways in phase 2 liver detoxification, then you can't detoxify the liver, you can't detoxify the body as accurately as you should be able to. And if that happens, you're going to start to run into downstream problems on just about everything. Okay.
And where can someone get that tested? Can you get that tested from a regular doctor? Would you have to go to a functional medicine practitioner or a naturopath?
Well, to get just say the MTHFR, you can get that from your practitioner if they will run it. Otherwise, you can do genetic testing like things like 23andMe, which gives you sort of like a big picture of it. But specifically for methylation, from information who I think is a authority on this would be the Walsh Research Institute in Chicago. They would look at doing a whole blood histamine test as being your best functional marker for methylation status, whether you are under or over. But you would want to speak with someone that understands that to know what to do with it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for those details. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about the root causes, so you understand that there's so many different things. Now we wanted to touch upon how to get tested properly, and this is what we touched upon in the beginning. So we will tell you exactly what to take to your doctor and what to request, and get your lab work done properly. So till date, it seems like most doctors will just run your TSH or T4 for you. But as you can see on the screen, there's a whole bunch of things here to fully understand really what is going on. Do you want to talk about any of these and which ones you see as more important, or if anything's even missing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a great that's a great number. I think the key thing is that it will be next to impossible for you to get all of those done from your regular GP. I just don't think that they will do it unless they are really in the know and they're comfortable with running a lot of different tests. Okay. You would have to speak with probably a functional medicine doctor. You may be able to talk to your doctor about doing it, and you might have to pay additionally for the other tests. Okay. But they're all really important, but you need to then talk to someone who understands how to read them. Because even if your doctor ran all of them, but they're not familiar with the optimal zones for different nutrients, they don't understand how to look at what a reverse T3 ratio to total T3 is and where it should be, you're not going to get the information that you need. So you need to speak with someone who actually understands what they're doing. Okay, awesome. And the antibodies, again, are so important. Yeah. For that leaky gut syndrome that you talked about, and figuring out if it's like autoimmune or not. And that's the primary one you need to see, because for blood testing, that's going to be the best one to find out if you actually have an autoimmune condition or not. And the thing is that you could get all of the other ones done, and you could even have a decade where they could all be normal, but if you never checked your antibodies, you may have had low levels of antibodies or high levels for years prior to the other ones ever showing something off. So in my mind, that's an essential one to check now.
You can't miss it. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. You know what? Before we even move on, I just thought of something as well that I think the audience might be curious about, and that's the basal body temperature test. And how accurate do you find that is?
I used to use the basal body test a lot more. Okay. And I'll hear mixed things on different people that I think have done a lot of research around it. Most recently, one of the practitioners I think has done a lot of work around it, Dr. Jerry Tennant in Texas. He actually doesn't use it anymore because he believes that it actually is a much better marker for adrenals than it is for thyroid now. Okay. So I find there's too much discrepancy with it. I still will often use it just functionally to kind of see where people are at and give an idea of like if they're still like if they're in Celsius, if there's down in the 35s, like something's off. Yeah. Okay. And I want to see it improve because it should still improve with both of those bumping up, but I don't know if I can use it as a direct correlation anymore. I would rather do all the blood work and really take a thorough case history. Okay. And if you were really concerned or there's a history of it, I would ask for a thyroid ultrasound and see, because they can often find nodules well before you would see changes in the blood work as well.
Okay, very good to know. So I think we have covered off now, guys, like the symptoms you may experience. You've sort of understood that there's so many different root causes. It's not just one thing. You have a better understanding now of hormones beyond beyond just T4 and your TSH. You see all those other hormones and now how they can affect the pathway and sort of what to ask for now. Now you're way more educated. You can go into your doctor or an integrative practitioner and ask for exactly the things that should be on your test. Definitely the antibodies. That should be on your test if you're worried. So our take-home message is really know the symptoms, go get tested, and make sure you're paying attention to some of these key things, because the first step you can take before even going to, let's say, an integrative practitioner is making sure your diet is in check. You're eating real whole foods, as that's going to affect your hormonal conversions. You're exercising. Your gut health is in check as well. You're not eating a standard North American diet, and you're taking care of it. And of course, keeping things like stress and adrenal function in check as well. I know it can seem crazy and overwhelming, all these things to look at, but that's why it's called holistic health, right? You always have to look at the full picture so that you're not just putting on a Band-Aid solution and that you're on medication for the rest of your life without ever addressing any of these other things.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately it looks like lots of stuff, but it's like really those are just plain fundamentals of health that we were actually born with. So it's just really trying to get back there. And one thing I'd say about getting your lab tests and stuff done is I can't tell you how many times I hear over and over again that no, I just got all my blood tests done, my doctor said everything's fine, but I still don't feel fine. If you don't feel fine, you have to keep digging. Find someone that will dig with you and that will help you kind of figure out what's at the underlying root of it.
It's a really good ending message. I like that. So yeah, now I'm just seeing if we have any comments. I believe Elizabeth is saying, appreciate the information. You are welcome, Elizabeth. We're really glad that you tuned in and that Dr. Jason Loken was here with us. Awesome. People are saying thank you. People are checking in from Florida. Hi, Joan. Okay, it seems like that's it for the comments for now, but you guys, you can still continue typing away. Take your time to absorb this information. Write more comments. We're going to be online tonight, tomorrow morning, checking, and I will respond to all of you guys. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's fun.
It was really amazing to pick your brain and yeah, for you sharing your knowledge with everyone. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, guys. Bye. We'll see you next time.
Everyone.
7 o'clock next week, Tuesday. Bye, guys. For being with us today on YouTube. Make sure you never miss an episode by hitting the subscribe button below. We do upload videos every single week.
And if you missed last week's video, you can check that out right over here. And make sure you check out our other awesome videos, including our other show, Real Food Live. It's amazing.
Right here.
And make sure you let us know comments and questions below.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.